let's switch gears now over to Ephrata. Okay, because the Ephrata Mounts, certainly being right across the street from Blue Ridge Television, a much easy trip for the crew and for you guys to go over there. You've spent many, many years over at War Memorial Field. You've actually seen it turn from a grass field to a turf field, right? With the baseball field and with the football field and all of that. One of the games you wanted to highlight was Ephrata versus Cocalico, and of course, why not? I mean, it's one of the best rivalries in the LL League, no matter what sport it is. And September 10th, 2010, Week 2 of the season, so barely into the season for both teams, but obviously a huge game for bragging rights. And Ephrata jumps all over Cocalico early in that game. What do you remember heading into that game and kind of the start for the Ephrata Mounts?
Well, Cocalico was returning a lot of players from the previous season, so I think they were really heavy favorites to not only win this game, but win a section and go on to districts as well. But again, it's a rivalry game, so you can't take anybody lightly, regardless of what their record was, who's back. I mean, you can go right down the list. And again, when you have that type of a game, the setting, the crowd, the electricity, again, just a huge crowd. I mean, and that is so nice to see when it comes to a matchup like this. And even though Ephrata had been down, you know, it's Cocalico, so there's nothing else that really needs to be said. And as you mentioned, they got out to that early start, and all of a sudden Cocalico was thinking, okay, we got ourselves a ball game here.
Oh, more than that, yeah.
You know, they battled back, but Ephrata, boy, they stood their ground, and then it came down to
well, we'll get to the
play.
finish. Yeah, we'll finish that in a second. But you had kind of mentioned a little bit that it had been tough going for Ephrata. In fact, when on the broadcast, you say the first victory against Cocalico since 2003, and it had been 6 straight losses to Cocalico by the Ephrata Mounts. And so obviously they were hungry to get the monkey off their back, and they did it in such a dramatic fashion, getting out to a 21-0 early lead. I mean, the first couple plays of the game, QB Jeremy Frank runs one down the sideline for like 66 yards. Then they have another touchdown, and they're leading 21-7 at halftime. So what was the feeling like at War Memorial Field? Ephrata had to be riding high. Did you see any panic in Cocalico? Did you think Cocalico could come back and complete the win in the second half? Well, take us back to 2010.
Well, you know, obviously Cocalico was stunned, needless to say, but you know, the thing about the coaching staff at Cocalico is that these are guys that have been there for a long time.
Yeah.
And nothing is going to faze this coaching staff. And I think that's one thing that Cocalico does so well, is that they can make adjustments at halftime. And, you know, anything that was exposed in the first half will get cleaned up in the second half. And I think the people in Ephrata were thinking, this is it, you know, we're going to do this. But at the same time thinking, there's still another half to play.
There's a lot of games.
And they know what Cocalico does. It is well documented through the history of what they like to do offensively. And trying to stop that is extremely difficult, which is why they're so successful with it. But obviously the second half was a whole nother story, and it just added to the intensity.
Well, Cocalico pounded the veer in the second half.
Yes.
They actually went to a little bit more speed with their freshman Spencer Moser. That's kind of when he popped onto the scene for Coach Gingrich. And Austin Hartman, from the stats, he had 148 yards on the ground in that game, 3 touchdowns. They missed an extra point, which put them behind 20-21 late in that game. So Ephrata's up by 1 point. Cocalico gets a crack at it right at the end. They're stalling out a little bit, kind of just past midfield. They get, lined up for a field goal. What do you remember about kind of the chaotic moments in the last couple seconds of that game?
It was like a bee's nest, if I remember correctly. People lining up, hurrying on the field. But the final seconds with that field goal.
Well, they run Cocalico's kicker onto the field, right? And I watched the telecast back. You guys. And everybody is kind of, rushed in Cocalico, but Ephrata calls a timeout. So Ephrata tried to freeze the kicker, but they actually set up for the winning play.
That's right.
Go ahead.
That's right. And then it happened so fast. From what I recall, it was a good snap, but just blazing in from the side was Scott Liebel. And when he blocked that kick, the eruption from the Ephrata people, fans in the stands. I mean, it would have blown the roof off if it was an enclosed building. I mean, it was that, dramatic and just explosive as far as the fans were concerned. And my goodness, Ephrata was celebrating on the field like they had just won the section championship.
Yeah, and let's put it into context. Again, they had lost 6 years in a row prior, so that's obviously something that was huge. Ephrata only wins 2 games that season, and one of them is against rival Cocalico. So a rough year for Ephrata, but that was obviously a big point. Cocalico goes on to make the district tournament. Okay, they go 8.
Finals.
They go 8-6. They make it to the District 3 finals against Bishop McDevitt. So to go from losing to a team that wins 2 games to making the District 3 finals was pretty impressive for Coach Gingrich and that Cocalico team.
Well, and so many times, regardless of the school, the team, when you take a loss like that, when you look back on it, sometimes that could be a wake-up call for you, and you can learn a lot from a loss. Sometimes you learn more in a loss than you do in a win, and I think Cocalico was able to. They were stunned.
Yeah.
I mean, they were stunned. But to their credit, they rebounded and made a real nice run the rest of the way.
Well, if you want to talk briefly, real quick, about another great moment in Ephrata football history, just last year, they finally got another long losing streak snapped when they beat Warwick in the George Mail Trophy game, and it was on Ephrata's home field. They finally knock off Warwick and just played really well second half and down the stretch. What are your memories and thoughts of, you had seen, 15, 16 years of just Warwick dominating that rivalry, and for Ephrata to finally get back to a point where they could be, and now they've won it 2 years in a row. So what was that like, calling that game?
Well, and that losing streak was, it was a bad losing streak because, Warwick really just dominated in a majority of those ball games. And unfortunately for Ephrata, that was in that time period, too, that they had that long losing streak. So, again, it's always the game that is the focus on the schedule because, you got the George Mail Trophy at stake and the desire to get that back and have that in your trophy case for a year. But it went a long, long time. Yeah. But you could just feel something in the air last year when they played. That Ephrata felt that, we've got enough pieces in place that we're going to come out and we're going to take this game.
Yeah.
And it was a solid effort.
Well, they had finally closed the gap. It felt like when you were watching, even the year before they lost by a hefty margin, but it just felt like there was a couple plays, the gap was closing, and then with Andre Weidman's senior year, you just felt like you had the running back, the offense, the line was good enough, the defense was, and it just caught Warwick at the right time.
And Chris Miller always says we got to do all the little things, and do the little things, and we got to build on them, and that's what he has been able to do in his tenure as Ephrata head football coach, is that, little by little, because things don't just happen overnight.
No,
it just doesn't happen. No. And, obviously this is, as I mentioned, this is a game that Ephrata has circled on their calendar every year, but they had all the building blocks in place. They could finally finish that project last year, and now they got to do an addition and get a second win this year.
2 in a row.